Oh boy. Oh, this is a mess. This is quite a bit of a mess. I gotta clean this. Oh, hello. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jason. I live in Eastern North Carolina in growing zone 8A, and today I'm gonna answer Chris's questions about the greenhouse, and maybe some of your questions too. Who's Chris, you might ask? Well, Chris is an individual who left a comment on my one-year review of the BC greenhouse recently. And in the comment, he lacked a lot of questions. So I decided to make a video trying to answer some of those questions, and I gotta get into the greenhouse to clean it up for fall anyways. I do want to mention one thing before we get talking about the greenhouse. I just recently went to my local garden center, and I picked up a bunch of plants, each one for $5. And let me show them to you real quick. I got that rose for $5, this rose for $5, this golden ticket privet, I got that for $5. Yeah, they all look a little rough, but that's because they've probably been sitting out for a couple of years in the garden center and they just need a lot of TLC. I will be repotting these and giving them some of that TLC that they need. I got this echinacea, which normally sells for $28.99, for $5. I got this echinacea, which normally sells for $20.99, for $5. This one, you know, it doesn't look like much. It's got a couple of leaves on it, but look, it's alive. It's growing. It's okay. Same thing with this one. I got this Coral Bells, which is normally $18.99. I got that for $5. So you never know when you're going to find a bargain. I pulled up to go buy birdseed, and I wound up walking out with $30 worth of plants that would normally retail for probably close to $100. It's astounding. I mean, each of those roses is probably $20 to $30. So I lucked out there. But you have to keep your eyes open sometimes, you know, especially this time of year. If you go to your local garden centers, you may wind up finding some good deals. And I know Lowe's, at least the Lowe's by me, maybe the Lowe's by you too. Maybe even Home Depot does it. I don't know for sure, but I definitely know Lowe's does it. They usually have clearance plants of racks. And if they have something there that you want, you can walk away with something for $2, $3, $4, $5. Let's say it's $10 and retails for $60. That's a bargain. That's a huge bargain. And who doesn't like a bargain plant? Yeah, they may look a little rough and they may be a little beat up, but you give them a little TLC and you got yourself a great deal. There's actually a YouTuber who, I can't think of the name of the channel, and if I do, I'll throw it down here, but I can't think of the name. But a young lady, and basically that's her whole garden. She went out and she found all these really nasty looking, horrible, beat up plants, and she got them for dirt cheap, and she planted up. Today she's got a beautiful, not huge, but she's got a fairly sizable garden, and it is very beautiful. And it was done with all basically bargain basement half dead plants. So that's a win. All right, enough of me prattling on. Let's get on to the greenhouse. I wrote all of Chris's questions down. Let me pull out my notepad here. And Chris states that they're going to build, he's going to build a greenhouse next year, and he doesn't want to make any mistakes, which is totally understandable. And before I bought this greenhouse, I had watched quite a few YouTube channels. I had watched a bunch of different gardening channels and things like that, and see how they use their greenhouses and the benefits and the pros and the cons and yada, 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 yada. All stuff that Chris is probably doing. I'm probably not the only YouTube channel that Chris has reached out to asking questions, because it sounds like they want to, you know, be in the know before they grow. Be in the know. Oh, I could make a t-shirt out of that. Nobody steal that. Be in the know before you grow. What tools do you use? If you're talking specifically for the greenhouse, small tools. And it really depends upon what you're going to be doing in the greenhouse, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I mean, I've got small Felco clippers as well as the bigger Felco clippers, and I use these all over the garden, not just for the greenhouse. I have a Gardener's Supply Company, there it is, little small spade. Rarely use this, but in the few times when I need to maybe get a small plant out of a seed pot or a tray or something along those lines. This does come in useful. So it's not a bad tool. And I picked this one up at Gardner Supply Company. Now I really don't use this in the greenhouse, and this is just a, what do you call these things? A little rake here. I know there's a better name for it, and I just can't think of the name off the top of my head. But this one's by DeWitt. You could pick up any kind. The reason I grabbed this one was simply because it had the 5 tines. I see a lot with 3, maybe some with 4. But either way, I wanted something with more than 3 tines to really rough up soil, to help dig out root-bound pots. And what I mean by that is sometimes I will have a plant grow in a pot and the plant dies, whatever reason. It's the end of season, I killed it, whatever. But the plant may be really stuck in there because all of the roots from the plant have taken over the whole pot. So now it's really stuck. So you can just dig in there with the thing and break up all those roots and then empty out the pot, and pretty self-explanatory there, I think. This one, again, use it more out in the garden and less in the greenhouse. But it is possible to use, but I can use this, and I have used this in the greenhouse itself. And this is just a little spade by Gardner's, I think it's made for Gardner Supply. It's probably a DeWitt, but the brand name doesn't matter. Either way, it's a small spade that I can get in there. There's a million and one different tools out on the market, and it's just about finding what's right for you in your price point and what's comfortable in your hands. I also use a lot of Sneebohr tools, and Sneebohr is a Dutch company, and they make old school, much similar to this, old school tools, stainless steel, wooden handles, beautiful stuff, all handmade. They are expensive though, but if you want a tool that will last your lifetime, and if you take care of it, children's lifetime, grandchildren's lifetime, I would think something like a Sneebohr would be the way to go. That's just me. But again, there's a billion and one different brands out there. It's just getting the tool that you feel comfortable with and that you enjoy using. So if it's a Dollar General little spade, do that. If it works for you, it works for you. What are some of the advantages of your setup, potting bench, plant tables, etc.? Let's go inside the greenhouse and take a look. So we're going to start on this side of the greenhouse, and I do apologize for the mess. As I said, I have to do cleanup in here. And I know I'm not the only gardener that does this, but this has become a bit of a dumping ground. And part of the reason being is I do not have a tool shed here in the vegetable garden. And the vegetable garden is sort of the center of the greater garden. I usually enter the vegetable garden first, and then I migrate out from that, go into the rose garden, the orchard, the flower garden, whatever it is. And as I'm moving back and forth between here and there and everywhere, I have a tool in my hands, and I just put it down, and there you go. On this side, amongst all the mess, before I get into this, we were talking more about tools a second ago. This is an example of a Sneebohr tool. This is one of their larger shovels. So it has I believe this is not oak, this is something else, but it's a hardwood handle, and then stainless steel, very thick metal. It's not going to bend and flex on you like some tools that you get maybe from a big box store, which are made from much thinner metals. And that's actually really good because I have pretty thick, heavy clay here. Clay, silt, sand, it's a mess, it's horrible. Either way, the blade does not move, so that's a plus. Here's another example of a Sneebohr tool, and this is a smaller tool, and this is one I've been using quite a bit lately when I'm planting out in the garden, because as I'm kneeling on the ground, I can get a bit more leverage if I need it versus a smaller hand trowel, but that's just me. All right, so this table on this side is made out of 2x4s, and I put this mesh on top, simply screwed into place, nothing special. But the reason I went with something like this, and the reason I did it on this side, is because the way the sun moves across the sky, this side of the greenhouse gets more light than the other side. Not that the other side is dark, this side just gets more direct sunlight, which is great for when I'm growing stuff in here during the winter time. And if you subscribe to me, click that bell icon to be notified of when I do post a new video. You can follow along as I'm growing stuff here in the greenhouse during the winter time, because I plan on doing that again this year. The greenhouse is 12 foot long, so the bench is approximately 12 foot long. And the reason I have this here, as I said, was because it gets the most sunlight. I went with the mesh because if I went with a solid wood surface and I water things, that solid wood surface collects some of the moisture and it helps rot the wood over time. Don't want that. You could try to avoid some of that if you went with a cedar top. So if you have cedar, or there's another wood out there which is fairly water repellent. I mean, you could even use pressure treated lumber if you wanted to. And that would help repel the water. But I didn't want to do that, and it was a cost issue as well. So I went with the mesh top here. It allows any excess moisture overflow from me watering pots or whatever to go right through. If I had to change something on this and I had the funds, what I would do is something that I'd seen on Pinterest. Was somebody took a shelving rack, so it's like a closet shelving rack, it's plastic coated metal, and they covered the top with that. The advantage to that over this would be the fact that nothing flops or falls over. This is not a flat surface. There's give in this, and sometimes the pots, especially smaller pots, want to lean one way or the other, and pots could fall over. It's not a deal breaker for me, but if I had the funds, I would invest in that, and this way it would give me more of a solid top, but still allow that water to drain right through and not have any rotting issues. The other thing I would change on these is the height. So if you're going to make your own benches, think carefully and measure 100 times about the height of your bench, because when I built these benches, I thought they were a good height. I forget what I made the height at, 3 foot or something like that. And long story short, all the benches wound up getting raised up just a little bit with pieces of scrap wood for a couple of different reasons. One of them was moisture or water on the ground. I didn't want the bottom of the legs rotting out. So I had scrap pieces of 2x4s, stuck them under. But that 1.5 inch raised up the benches to a better working height. Strangely enough, even though my initial thought was they were good working height, once they stuck those little pieces of wood underneath, it raised them up just enough so now they're really at a good sort of basically waist high working height for me. So as I'm standing here doing whatever I'm doing, things are working out well. So that really is that on this side of the greenhouse. I wouldn't really change anything else. I really like the working bench. The depth on this working bench is 2 foot, and I could have gone deeper, but it didn't make much sense to me for a number of reasons. The greenhouse is about 8 feet wide. It's an 8x12, and I have room by the door here. I could have made this deeper, but by doing so, I lose a little bit of floor space and working space, and B, it didn't make much sense so far as the depth. And let me show you. This is a standard 10x20 tray, commonly used. You can find them in commercial growing setups. You can find them in home gardens. This is just a standard. So it's approximately 10 inches by 20 inches. And it fits nicely on the bench. If I had gone deeper, now I'd have this awkward space here in the front. And maybe if I did the trays this way, I could put 2 or 3. I think it wouldn't work all that well. Plus you have to reach over. Now, it's not the end of the world. I'm a fairly tall person, but if you're shorter, I'm 5'9". So, but if you're shorter, then maybe all that you don't want to do that stretching if you don't have to. So the 2 foot worked out well for me. Let's look at the other side. So on this side, I also have a table. Same as that side, except it's shorter. And the reason it's shorter is because I have my potting bench over there, and I'll show you that more in detail in a second. Again, 2 foot depth, and I think you can see in the camera, yes, this shelf here. This shelf here is just made with a few brackets I bought off Home Depot. Again, because I have the slats here in the vertical beams, I can turn around and hook those into there, and I just put a piece of scrap lumber that I had to act as a shelf. Gives me a little more shelf space because I have a whole bunch of clutter and whatnot and thingamajigs and doohickeys. Before we get to the potting bench though, I do want to show you the back wall. I feel like this video has gone on really long and there's still like 6 questions to answer. I do apologize. I have this shelving unit, which I put wheels on to hold various pots, planting trays, fertilizers, things that I use on a regular basis that I keep in here. Now, I hope this winter to build a tool shed. And when I build the tool shed, a lot of the fertilizers, the succulent soil that I have here, that'll all go into the tool shed. And then that will free up shelving space for me to store more pots, trays, that kind of thing. Now let's look at the potting bench. Okay, in this hot mess of a corner, I really need to put away all these tools. Again, I have to get in here and really clean this space out because it is getting very messy. So over here I have my potting table. Now my potting table is 4 feet long, 2 feet deep, and it's a good working size for me. Again, I could have made it deeper, but then I have to stretch and reach, and the other thing is more of, if it's deeper, more junk can accumulate on it. So to try to keep the junk to a minimum, which doesn't really seem to work, it's only 2 foot deep. Now I made this totally out of scrap wood, pallet wood, and a few other odds and end pieces that I had lying around the garage. It's not the best piece. I would like to rebuild it nicer sometime in the future when more funds are available. So what I did on one side of the potting table was I made a little bin, and it's 2 foot by 2 foot because it takes up half the table, and I keep my potting soil in there. I've seen many potting tables on Amazon and YouTube and Pinterest, etc., etc. This apparently is a common feature, so I was like, give it a try, and I like it. It works well for me. And then I have a 2 foot by 2 foot flat working section. So if I'm working on a tray of seedlings or whatever, I can put it here. I can put my potting soil in. I have a scoop someplace. I have a scoop. This scoop is Spear and Jackson, brand name. You can get like cheap, really, you can get cheap ice scoops for like $5 on Amazon that basically do the same thing. I wanted the wooden handle, and part of the reasons why I wanted the wooden handle is because, again, I live in eastern North Carolina and it gets hot. It's actually 80 degrees in the greenhouse today with a cloudy sky. So if the sun was out, it would probably be closer to 100. And if this was all metal sitting in the sun, it would get a little toasty. It would be a little uncomfortable. So would I change anything in this space? Not really. I would probably just make this bench a little sturdier, and I think that's about it. I'm having used this now for a couple of seasons. I'm pretty happy with the layout and the setup. And one more point. Again, I feel like this video is running on way too long, and I do apologize, but one more point. I have a 30-gallon trash can that I put a large bale of peat into underneath the bench over here. I barely ever use peat, so that big bale of peat that you get from a big box store, that's going to last me years and years and years, and I keep it dry and safe in the 30-gallon can. And I also have some smaller cans of perlite and vermiculite and a few other knickknacks and pieces or whatever on a rolling shelf underneath the potting bench. I went with a rolling shelf just because I wanted to be able to have the ability to pull it out, sweep out underneath, that kind of thing. Anyways, next question. I see a lot of clay pots. What are the advantages of using them considering seepage? Normally don't use clay pots in something like seedlings. I can, and I have. The biggest problem with clay pots with, let's say, seedlings, and I can grow a seedling in one of these clay pots. Clay absorbs the water from the soil. It's a porous material. So let's say you water your seedling, life is good. 6 hours later, the soil is completely dry, even though you gave the plant a good soaking. So were I to grow seedlings in these small pots, what I would do, and I have done this in the past, is I would put them in a plastic tray like this. Then what I could do is fill the plastic tray with water, and then the pot absorbs the water. The soil absorbs the water from the pot because the pot can only absorb so much water. And the seedling is happy as happy as anything. It's just happy. when I'm planting up other items, I prefer terracotta for a number of reasons. One, the aesthetics. I do not like plastic pots if I can avoid them. That being said, I plan on buying a bunch of plastic pots later in the year for various things, and I'll talk about that when I get there. But there's nothing that beats the aesthetic value to me of a real terracotta pot. Clay is the same thing. It's, you know, because you can buy clay pots as well. Terracotta pot, it's just something aesthetically pleasing. That being said, as I stated before, it does absorb water, so you have to be careful what you're planting in there, where you're putting it, and how much water it's going to need. So if it's a water-hungry plant and it needs full sun, you're probably going to be watering this quite often. Again, just because the water evaporates not just from the top, but also from the pot itself as the pot is absorbing water. Other advantage to a terracotta pot is it absorbs heat, which is also good for certain plants, and it's also good for seedlings. So I just prefer the aesthetic value, the aesthetics of it. They're not plastic. If the terracotta breaks, I can use the terracotta as crocks on the bottom of a pot, of another pot, to prevent seepage of compost out the bottom. These break, I can recycle them in a sense. Plastic rock breaks, yeah, I can't recycle it. I can throw it in the recycling bin hoping that it gets recycled. Okay, so the last three questions should be pretty quick. What about electricity for lights, electric tools, etc.? I don't use electric tools at all in my greenhouse other than, like, let's say an electric auger or lawnmower, that kind of thing. All that can be charged in the garage, and I like it better over in the garage because they're not tools that I use on a regular basis. So chargers, that kind of thing, go over there. Electric lights, I don't have any electric lights. I could, and I've thought about doing something like solar, putting a little solar panel in there and a couple of LED light bulbs. You can buy that stuff on Amazon. But I don't because, again, Eastern North Carolina, and once the sun sets, the bugs come out en masse. It is a nightmarish thing. You could sweep your arm through the air and then just have it covered with bugs. Now, it's not that way in the wintertime, thankfully, and I could put lights in there to work in the wintertime, but by the time the sun is going down around 4:30, I'm pretty much tired and done, and there's other things to do inside the house, laundry, dishes, dinner, etc., etc., etc. So I don't plan on putting in electric lights in here, but if I did, they'd probably be something like a little solar panel, maybe a couple LED light bulbs. I've seen setups like that on Amazon. So that's what I would do. If I lived in a colder climate, let's say New York, then electricity would be a thing. And I would have I would do one of two things. I would either have more of like a solar panel battery setup, something like that, and use that, or probably have a trench dug and have an electric line run out to the greenhouse. And the reason being is not so much for electric tools, but for things like heat mats. So if I wanted to start seeds in my greenhouse during the, let's say, late winter, early spring, inside the greenhouse, I could use, I would plug heat mats into that, and that would give me the, the heat that I need for the seed germination. Again, I'm in a warmer climate here. I don't necessarily need that. And last Christmas, we had that ridiculous Arctic blast. And down here where I am, we got to 20 degrees during the daytime. At nighttime, the temperature was in the teens. I'll talk about what I have for heating here in a second, but the greenhouse didn't freeze. So it all worked out, which was great. Again, if I lived in New York, I would have an electric heater in there or a propane heater just to keep the heat up in the greenhouse so any tender plants that I have in there don't die. Now, heating. What I opted to go with just to keep the temperature warm enough in the greenhouse for the plants that I overwinter, my citrus plants and a few other plants that are a little more tender. Let's say they're tender perennials or hardy annuals. I can overwinter them in the greenhouse along with the seed starting. But you obviously don't want anything inside the greenhouse freezing. And this is not an insulated greenhouse. So what I do is I have a bunch of these milk jugs, and I have some 5-gallon water jugs as well that I spray painted black, and they're filled with water. And I just line them up on the sunniest sides, which would be the front and that side of the greenhouse, because that's the way the sun goes. And they heat up during the day and they release their heat at night. It's a sciencey thing. It's pretty fun. but it keeps the temperature inside the greenhouse just warm enough. So again, it's not going to freeze. And with that crazy Arctic blast that we got last year, I had tender lettuce that I was sure, they were little seedlings, and I was sure that they were going to be gone. When I got back from a trip, I went inside and they were fine. So obviously these things work. You may need quite a few of them depending upon the size of the greenhouse, and I plan on adding a few more this year, but it works for me. So I don't need a electric or propane heater. Again, if I lived in New York in a colder climate, I definitely would. So I would definitely have electric run out to my greenhouse. 2 more questions. So the next question is, what about water? What do I do for water? Well, mostly I use a hose, and I've done videos on this, how I have my watering system set up around the garden. So I have a hose, but I don't necessarily always drag the hose into the greenhouse because, well, that's kind of a pain. So what I normally do is I use a couple of different watering containers. This smaller one I can use for watering seedlings. It has a little rose on it, which tends to get clogged up with my hard water, but it still works. So I can use this for my seedlings. And yes, it's a small thing, so I'd have to normally fill it up. What I do is I keep a larger 2-gallon in the greenhouse, and I can use it to top this off as needed. The other thing I have is a 1-gallon, similar to that 2-gallon, except it's a little lighter because it's only 1 gallon, and it's got a nice rose on it. That's what they call this, the thing on the end here. And I can just walk up and down those benches, watering what I need to water as I need to water it. But I usually use this for the benches. Now, going forward in the future, my long-term plan would be on the back side of the greenhouse to set up a water barrel system and to collect the water and then have that go out into a trough that I'll probably keep on the side over here, that then I can dunk the water cans into, fill up, and then water whatever I need to water inside the greenhouse. All right, and last but not least, is interesting to know why you think you need a bigger one, what's missing, or what do you have not enough have room for. Many of you more experienced gardeners you're probably already answering this question in your head, because if you have a greenhouse, you always want a bigger greenhouse. When I was researching greenhouses, the suggestion was always get a greenhouse bigger than what you think you need. And so again, I got an 8x12. Could I have gotten away with something smaller? Probably. 4x6, I could use it. I wouldn't have enough room for everything, but I could use it. So an 8x12 I could definitely use. Now, if sky's the limit, funds were of no object, I would go bigger. And one of the reasons is that you can grow more inside your greenhouse. You would have more space inside your greenhouse for overwintering things. Again, I put my citrus trees in there, and they're getting kind of sizable, and they will continue to get bigger. The benches that I don't use for seed starting, which is mostly this side. So on this side, I do use benches for the seed starting, but if there's any spare space, I put tender annuals, tender perennials. If I dig up something, let's say in November, take it, I would put it in a pot, and I would put it into the greenhouse temporarily over the winter. Once springtime comes, then I can plant it out into the garden. But it just protects the plants. So a bigger greenhouse would give me more flexibility of being able to store more plants over the winter, and I would have more bench space to grow more things. The 8x12 was the biggest I could afford. It was the biggest size that I thought I could maximize, that I thought I could use, and it works for me. I could live with this 8x12 for years to come. But if I had $1 million, I would get a 12x14 maybe, or maybe even something a little larger. Sophie, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? So that was all of Chris's questions. I hope Chris found that useful. I hope some of you may have found that useful. If you guys have any comments, suggestions, etc., leave them below. If you have your own greenhouse, let us know what you do with your greenhouses. How do you use them? Is it just a add-on space? Are they not used during the winter? Do you have them heated? Do you have electric run to them? I'm sure we would all find all that very interesting. Yeah, Sophie says, don't forget to check out all the links below. I have links to my website, social media, etc., etc., etc. She also says, don't forget to subscribe, because if you forget to subscribe and you don't click that bell icon to be notified when I do post a new video, you could miss what I'm growing here, growing inside the greenhouse during the winter time. So that's very important. So that's going to wrap it up for today. I'm sorry if this was a very long video. I still have a lot to clean up inside that greenhouse. We're going to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.